Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna. Om Bhurvuvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat. Om Namo Smanantaya Sahasramurtaye Sahasrapadakshishirorvahave Sahasranamne Purushaya Sashvate Sahasrakoti Yugadharine Namah. Harihi Om. Namastestu Mahamaye Shripithe Surapujite Shankha Chakra Gadahaste Mahalakshmi Namostude. Namaste to all the viewers and devotees of the Dharma Samvad. Welcome again. Today we are going to talk about the Tulsi Vivah. Tulsi Vivah, very important festival. And he says, if you want to understand the Hinduism, then you have to understand Hindustan. Hindustan, if I explain another way, called the Bharat Bhumi. Bhumi means the land, land of the bhakti, land of the devotion, land of the faith. Where every second day, every second week, every second month, one ya another corner of the Bharat Bhumi, one ya another festival we celebrate. But each and every festival have an in-depth meaning, in-depth understanding for us to human to understand. We all of us know Tulsi. Tulsi in English it says basil leaf. Tulsi leaves is very important. We celebrate Tulsi Vivah. Okay, the story about the Vrinda got married with the Bhagwan Shaligram and then King Bali Raja and Bhagwan Sri Vishnu Chaturmas end and Bhagwan Sri Vishnu come from the Patal Lok to the Prithvi Lok and then go towards the Swarg Lok, and all those stories available in all platforms. And if we do the same repeating, then we not Dharma Samvad. Dharma Samvad is here to uplift your knowledge, uplift your journey from A to B level. So today we're going to understand Tulsi Vivaha celebration, marriage ceremony of the Lakshmi and Narayan, Bhagwan Sri Vishnu Lakshmi and Narayan in the form of the Tulsi and the Shaligram. Today, let us understand is the mantra tells us Tulsi Shrihema Rupacha Ratna Rupacha Manjarim Bhava Moksha Padatubhyam Arpayaya Haripriyaya. Very nicely the mantra explained to us. This Tulsi which we all of us know is. First thing first I will say, in all of us, our Hindu house, we must have a Tulsi plant into the house. Tulsi is attract the wealth, Lakshmi. Tulsi itself is a Lakshmi. And the Lakshmi is which gives us not only the wealth, We have spoken about in our previous talk. The wealth is not only one Lakshmi which understand. The health, intelligence, intellectuals, that all is Lakshmi, is real wealth. Knowledge is one of the wealth we need to be understand. We only have kept it ourselves into our materialistic need. And that is why we said, when if I have a 20 million and 30 billion rand, then I am a wealthy person. It's not the case. If you have intelligence, if you have intellectuals, if you know something, if you can give your knowledge to somebody, that itself is your wealth. And today we are, myself and my friend Greenby, we using this platform to share our knowledge to everybody. So whatever wealth we have, we sharing. But anyway, so if we have a Tulsi plant, Tulsi leaves in our house, then our intelligence, our intellectual, our health, not only that, many other things will be increased in our. Okay, let me come to the point. So Tulsi Vivah we celebrate. The marriage ceremony happen from today, Chaturmas end, and then Chaturmas end, and then actual marriage ceremony starts. Last 4 months, sannyasi stays where they are. All the sadhus do the tapascharya tap. They break the fast. They break the tap, and then they move with the new journey of life. So as I was explaining about the Tulsi Shri Hemarupa, so the mantra says Hem. Hem means gold. Tulsi Bhagwan Sri Vishnu is considered as a gold. Tulsi Shri Hemarupa. Marjar means that the seeds of the Tulsi is considered as a diamond and ruby and that type of the expensive gemstones. Tulsi Shri Hemarupa Ratna Rupa Manjari. Bhava Moksha Pada. Moksha means salvation. Salvation is not which is we look forward to be okay. Our soul will leave the body and then we will be somewhere in a heaven. Salvation means if you live with the peace, comfort, and that is called the salvation. So now, what is the goal is in our life? Number three, we must understand this is not like normal understanding. It's a very in-depth understanding. What is the goal in our life? Our goal is our family bonding together, our real happiness, our joy. If we have a 50 billion in our account, but what if we cannot spend the time with our family? If we cannot eat a one meal with our family, what to have it the 50 million will do with us? Our goal is a family. The Tulsi, he teach us the value of the family. When we say marriage, to Bhagwan Lakshmi Narayan marriage ceremony means it's a concept of the family, togetherness, jointness, live together. When we celebrate Tulsi Vivah, in these days, Vivaha means the marriage ceremony is like becoming a like slightly joke. Today they get married and then 10 days later is divorce. One thing we must understand in our Hinduism, there is no concept of the divorce. We must remember that part. And this younger generation, I would like to tell, like, please try to understand. The marriage is a very, very important sanskar. I will use the call the sanskar. We have made only ceremony, but it's sanskar. It's upliftment. And Bhagavan Sri Vishnu with the Lakshmi is teaching us how to stay together. Mata Lakshmi went to the King Bali and make the King Bali as a brother and ask Bhagavan Sri Vishnu, Lakshmi Narayan. These are long stories, we have a very little time. That's why I'm not going in depth the stories. But message which is coming to the marriage. We have to keep our marriage together. For small things in these days, we have divorce, and particularly in this last lockdown season, the way the case is coming to us from the family relationship, we think about, okay, is this the marriage ceremony we have understood so far? No, please do not make the mistakes. Once you get together, no one can separate. We must remember that part. Once that the knot is tied, stay forever. And no matter what circumstances emerge, We have to stay together. That is called the Tulsi is a gold. Marger seeds. eh? Seeds of the Tulsi is a diamond, expensive gemstone. What is that diamond and everything is in our life? The diamond and everything in our life is, if we have next generation with full sanskar, with full knowledge of our Hinduism, our culture, our tradition, that is our real gems. That is our real diamond and ruby and everything. If we can transform our knowledge, our culture, our tradition, our Hinduism, that is why I started to understand to understand the Hinduism. We need to understand the land of the Bharat Bhumi, where every single day, every second day, the festival. Why? The festival send us a message of the unity, message of the harmony, message of the family value, message of the health. Remember, I will in Ayurveda, if you have Tulsi leaves 5 leaves every day. If you put Tulsi na the 5 Tulsi leaves in a copper loto or copper glass, leave it overnight and if you drink that water every morning before the sunrise, the all minimum health issues will be automatically resolved. Stress, depression will be not there at all. That is the bhava moksha. Moksha means salvation. Salvation is our if our health is good, we are good. We have to keep ourselves healthy. If we can go to the different kind of the exercise places to keep ourselves healthy, we so why can't we do these basic things? Keep the tulsi, and if you keep the tulsi plant in your house, the most of time that mosquitoes and everything don't even come to closer to your house. That's the truth I'm talking about. Bhagwan Sri Vishnu, in his food we offer tulsi. So when we offer tulsi leaves on his food, so then all other mosquitoes and everything don't even come to that food. That food stay fresh. So Tulsi Vivah is not only the ordinary marriage ceremony, it's the in-depth meaning in our Tulsi Vivah ceremony we conduct in our mandir. We offer the Chappan Bhog to Bhagwan Sri Vishnu. And if you cannot do anything in your house in this COVID time, if you cannot attend any kind of the ceremony, I will request to everyone, those who are watching and those who will watch after this, we must do one thing. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Mahamantra. Please chant from today till the Monday, at least minimum 108 times, maximum as you wish. In these days, the universal power from the universe is here to bless us. Supreme power is here to bless us. Supremeness is here to guide us. Only we need to take advantage. We need to take that power within. And if we chant Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya mantra, we will receive that supreme power too. Now, when we say Tulsi Vivaha, Bhagwan Sri Vishnu who gives us a different kind of the power. We all of us pray to the Bhagwan Sri Vishnu. What Bhagwan Sri Vishnu gives us peace, and more important is calmness. Anyway, if you see, whenever you see Bhagwan Sri Vishnu face, Shantakaram, Shant Akar, calmness, no stress. And this is what we need in this materialistic, in this time, calmness. And that is called the Tulsi Vivah celebration. Thank you for watching us. In next level, we're going to talk about the 26/11 incidents which took place years ago in India. That was the act of the extremism. And what has happened and how has happened, our next guest speakers, our guest will be explained to you. How can extremism destroy many lives, innocent lives. And Hinduism don't teach that type of the value. Hinduism have a something different understanding. And this is why we say, please stay into the bhakti marg of the devotion, marg of the faith, path of the devotion, path of the faith. Thank you for watching me. And now Laksh Bhai will be take over in the next segment about the 2611 explanation. Laksh Bhai, thank you for your timing. And then we will continue from that our next segment of the details of this 2611. It was very bad incidents, and I was watching whole night that day. And it was really terrible incidents happens, and we cannot describe in a word. But I know you have a very different, in-depth talk about it, so you will explain in details about it. Thank you for
that. Namaste. Thank you, Gopal Vyas Bhai. Today marks the 12th anniversary of the Mumbai terror attack. Dharma Samvad video channel has two special guests to join us in our online studio. Now, as a disclaimer, please note that both speakers are speaking in their personal capacities, and their views and comments do not represent that of this channel or any of their employers. Now, before we start with the panel participants, I'm first going to show you a video which relates to the Mumbai attack. Now, this is a video that was shown by Al Jazeera News. So I will play exactly the same thing to give you some background. Here it is.
It began just after 9 o'clock on the evening of November the 26th, when the gunmen landed at the gateway of India in inflatable boats. It takes little more than an hour for the men to pan across the city and carry out their attacks. The targets, a Jewish outreach centre at Nirman House, popular tourist spot Leopold's Cafe, the luxury hotels, the Taj Mahal, and the Oberoi Trident across the peninsula, the Karma Hospital, and the Chhatrapati Shivaji railway station. Chaos has now kicked in. It's punctured intermittently with the sound of explosions and flames now engulfing the 100-year-old hotel. A further twist to the terror as those who've managed to escape tell their stories.
They wanted anyone with British or American passports. Say anyone who had a British or American passport, they wanted to know. So I guess they were after foreigners, yeah.
A tight security cordon around the hotels as firefighters worked to rescue guests trapped inside. The night also bringing claims of responsibility from the previously unknown Deccan Mujahideen. An eerie quiet descends on the usually bustling city as Wednesday's nightmare continues into Thursday. As security prepare to move in on 3 locations where hostages are still being held, India's Prime Minister Manmohan Singh condemns the attacks.
We will take the strongest possible measures to ensure that there is no repetition of such terrorist acts.
Nightfall and still no resolution to the crisis, but from the Jewish centre, 7 more hostages are freed. Throughout Friday, commandos continue their push to end the sieges at the Taj, the Oberoi Trident and the Jewish centre. Their efforts pay off as more than 90 hostages from the Oberoi are freed.
We are definitely grateful for the work done by all of the forces that were engaged in this.
Across the peninsula, troops secure Nariman House, but the bodies of a number of hostages are found in the debris. And finally, on Saturday, in a last manoeuvre by Indian security, the siege at the Taj was brought to an end. The last remaining gunman had been dealt with, but scores of people had lost their lives. Sahil Rahman, Al Jazeera, Mumbai.
Okay, I trust that video provided some good background relating to this matter. So firstly, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, that is Mark Friedman. Now, Mark Friedman is a member of the Jewish community of Chabad of Strathaven in Johannesburg. We all may not be aware, but this Jewish center that was attacked in India was the Chabad of Mumbai. Mark has traveled to India a few times in the past 25 years, and he's closely associated with those that were killed in the Nariman House Synagogue. Welcome to you, Mark. Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Lux. Namaste, nice to see you.
All right, namaste to you as well. Okay, Mark, I'd like to ask you a few questions. The first thing is, can you tell us, please, a bit about the Chabad organization here in SA and how it is related to the Chabad organization in Mumbai?
Well, Chabad is a Jewish outreach organization that was started by a Jewish luminary, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, often referred to as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the equivalent in Hinduism, to him would be a guru. He's a person who was widely considered a very highly developed spiritual person. He died in the 1990s, but one of his most important legacies is that he encouraged many of his followers. He lived in New York, but he had followers right around the world, and after his death, a number of them went to various locations around the world to act as Jewish outreach agents, essentially. So they're probably in most countries in the world now, and their role is really to assist either Jews who are in those countries and maybe from other places and don't have a connection to the country. So they basically offer them an ability to keep their Jewish observance intact whilst they're outside their home. And they also service the needs of Jewish travelers in those various areas. So the Chabad organization, their goal is to really service the needs of various Jews around the world who might be in far-flung places far away from their home. And Gabi Holzberg and Rivka Holzberg, the rabbi and rebbitzin at Nariman Point at the Chabad in Mumbai, were Chabad agents who were working in Mumbai at the time.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. That's not information that we're generally aware of. Now, given that you were associated to the rabbi and, with his family that died in this attack, and we understand also that his son survived, but his wife was pregnant. She was killed in there as well. And there were 6 others that lost their lives. Can you tell us a bit about this family, your association with them, what you know about them? Where is their son now that lost his parents because he was only 2 years old? Over to you, Mark.
Okay, so because I traveled to India a number of times, and when I was in India, I wanted to maintain my Jewish connections. So I contacted them before I traveled there. And they're people of great self-sacrifice. They're really there to help as many people as possible. And when I contacted them, they invited me over to spend some time with them. I went to the synagogue there in Mumbai, the Knesset Eliyahu, which is actually an Indian synagogue, but Rabbi Holzberg was also in attendance there. And then they invited me over for a meal at their home. So I'd gotten to know them over 2 trips to India in 2004 and 2005, and I'd subsequently seen them on a trip to New York as well. Certainly, Gabi, the rabbi. I met Rivka when I was in Mumbai. So I wouldn't say I had a long-standing connection with them, but they'd been very welcoming to me when I was there. They are to anybody who they're there to assist. As I say, they really show a great deal of self-sacrifice in the sense that they've taken a decision to go and live far away from the environment just to service the needs of people who happen to be of the same spiritual faith as them. So I would describe them really as heroes and heroines, all the agents of this organization, but particularly them, as it ultimately cost them the sacrifice that they made to others.
Okay. Are you able to tell us about the rabbi's son? Obviously he had lost both his parents, but he survived. He was one of the survivors. Can you tell us a bit about him? Do you know where his whereabouts?
Yes. So there's two parts to that. I'll mention the rabbi's son, but then I think we should also focus on his childminder, and that's Sandra Samuel, who was an Indian woman who was working in the home of the Holzbergs and basically looking after the son. Son's name was Moshe, which is the Hebrew word for Moses. And essentially she basically took it on herself to save the son after both the parents were murdered in this attack. She basically whisked the young 2-year-old child out of the premises and away to safety. So what happened subsequent to that is that the Holzbergs were actually an Israeli couple, and Sandra Samuel, who is possibly the great hero in this, she decided to give up her life in India to go back to Israel with the 2-year-old Moshe to look after him and to help rear him. The maternal grandparents, Rivka Holzberg's parents, ultimately took on guardianship of Moshe, and as far as I know, Sandra Samuel is still in India, but the couple, Sandra and Moshe and the guardians, the grandparents, went to India 2 years ago on the invitation of the leader Narendra Modi to meet with him. Moshe was 11 years old then, and subsequently he's had his bar mitzvah, which is the coming of age when a Jewish youngster becomes a man at the age of 13. There's certain rituals, and he becomes responsible for himself, alleviated of his parents' responsibility for him, so he's effectively an adult. Sadly for him, he had been orphaned at the age of 2 in this heinous attack. But as I say, they'd gone back to India, and he's grown up. Apparently, he was originally very traumatized by what had happened, but it sounds like he's really grown over these years, and a great testament would be paid to Sandra Samuel for her self-sacrifice in effectively giving up her life in India to go and look after Moshe along with his guardians in Israel.
Thank you very much, Mark. So what I'm going to do is come back to you. I would like to also introduce our second speaker, that is Professor Anand Singh. Now, Professor Anand Singh, he's a professor in anthropology and a very prominent member of an organization called Hindasa. He's very well known for his various publications in newspapers, media, and so forth. Now, he will share with us his views on the source of this terrorism, because we can see the result now, how it has impacted families, right down to children, traumatizing them and affecting their lives as the years are moving forward. And we'd like to know from Professor Anand Singh whether or not justice would be meted out to those perpetrators, and also how close such terrorism will be on our doorstep. So welcome, Professor. I just want to do an audio check to ensure you can hear me clearly. Professor? Professor, you're currently on mute. Perhaps you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I can hear you very clearly. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. All right. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'd just like to ask you a question. Looking at this entire event, now Pakistan, this entire issue from some time back, it initiated its own attacks just when it was formed, and that attacks it initiated against Jammu and Kashmir just after, Pakistan became separate from India. Now, coming to recent times, we know that New York was attacked on 9/11 in 2001. And the biggest perpetrator there, the main person behind it, was Osama bin Laden, who was found in Pakistan and also killed there. Then now this Mumbai attack, it has taken place 7 years after this New York attack, and the terrorists again are from Pakistan. Now, can you tell us why Pakistan the source of such global terrorism?
Thank you, Lux. It's a good question. It's very appropriate under the circumstances. For most of its existence in post-independence Pakistan, it has been the military that has been in charge rather than the civilian government. And you would know that despite popularly elected civilian governments, the military, in collaboration with Pakistan's ISI or Inter-Services Intelligence Unit, continued to maintain a hegemonic control over the population in Pakistan. Essentially, Pakistan might be practicing democracy on paper, but it is really a haven for terrorism, largely because the army continues to remain in control of the population, as well as in control of most of the resources in the country. And it has brought the country down to its knees. So much so that the situation continues to deteriorate to the point of international organizations wanting to declare it a failed state. But Pakistan is not just a failed state. If you take into consideration the number of attacks that have been taking place within the country, especially against schools and their children, that is not the behavior of a civilized state. That is really total disregard for human life, total disregard for the rule of law, and over and above that, it has a lot to do with gangsterism. Pakistan is not just a failed state, it's a gangster state. And that's what we need to understand. It will simply act upon whatever the military wants to do. And that's what it is going to do. Whether the international world or its immediate neighbors would want to try to caution it against this kind of behavior, it will continue to behave in this way. They are amongst the biggest suppliers of youngsters who unfortunately get drawn into this world of terrorism with promises of big rewards. Now, you might know as well that in the 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, when those young men, those 10 young men who come into a country via clandestine means, enter its financial capital, that is Mumbai, and then stage attacks as though they were really going to leave the country, making themselves believe, or having been taught to believe, that these people, having hostages with them, would allow them to leave the country safely. What they totally misunderstood is that India has a tremendous record of significant successes in battles. And they were not going to leave that country alive. 10 young men were simply sent to their deaths. But before they were finally neutralized, what actually happened was that Indian intelligence picked up their voices, intercepted their calls with their handlers in Pakistan, and overheard those conversations about their handlers keeping to their promises to pay the money that they were promised to their families. But as usual, Pakistan continued to disregard the evidence that was produced and continued to deny that it was their fellow citizens that were sent across the border. They denied almost every war that they took part with in India or fought against India. And they continued to deny the war in Kargil. The Indian army had to bring in soldiers of their own and mobilize the local Muslim community in Kargil to give decent burials to the Pakistani soldiers, because Pakistan will not accept those soldiers, denying that it was theirs, despite all of the evidence that was produced. So we're dealing not just with a rogue state, we're dealing with a set of gangsters who will simply unleash any amount of terror at their disposal. I'll stop at this for now.
Thank you,
Are you
Professor. Yes, I'd like to go over to Mark. Mark, in your opinion, we've seen the video now. It was a Nariman house that was attacked. Can you tell us, perhaps, in your view?
Sorry, Lux, I'm battling to hear you a little.
All right. Can you hear me any better now?
You're breaking up a bit, but try and go ahead.
All right. My question is, why do you think Nariman House was attacked? Do you hear me, Mark?
So I think I heard your question. If I understand it correctly, you were asking me why Nariman House was attacked.
Yes.
So look, I'm by no means an expert on military strategy or counterterrorism or anything like that. But what I can maybe give a view on why I think that the Chabad house may have been attacked. I think that often that what you find is that these Jewish organizations are rife because of a level of anti-Semitism that exists in certain societies, and that might have been the reason that a Jewish target was in fact chosen. You know, India has been known for tolerance. It's always been a country that's welcomed all religious faiths, and there's a long history of people living side by side from different perspectives. And perhaps was a view of the perpetrators of this particular act of terrorism, that what they wanted to do was shake the society to the core and show that effectively the society that's tolerated various levels of or people from varying backgrounds shouldn't be allowed to do so, and that the level of safety that people would feel in observing their religious practices might be shaken by attacking what is essentially a very small minority. Because remember, there are over 1 billion people in India, and of those, there are only 5,000 Indian Jews. So you know that's like a minuscule fraction of a percentage of people in the population that are Jewish. So I guess the message it would send out to the whole society, such a minority would be attacked. So that's just my speculation, but I'm certainly not commenting as an expert.
Okay. Nariman House, I assume it has been rebuilt, maybe painted and restored. I understand it's now called Nariman Lighthouse. Is the services that the Chabad provide, is that still ongoing now at Nariman House?
So I've been back there subsequent to that, and there is a new Chabad agent there. I'm afraid his name escapes me for the moment, because the last time I was back there was 2011. So I apologize for not recalling who the new agent, of Chabad there is. But what I would say is that the actual synagogue was not a synagogue that was run by Chabad. Chabad is an outreach organization. They run a home where they basically let people in, and they assist people with needs who come from outside the society. The synagogue is in fact a synagogue of the Indian Jewish community there, and that is called Knesset Eliyahu, which is in the center of Fort in Mumbai, and yeah, so the synagogue, as far as I'm aware, is still operational, but it only has services on the Sabbath, as far as I know, which is the Friday night into Saturday.
Okay, understood. All right, I'm going to cross over to our on-the-ground reporter, and that is Kirit Bhai. Kirit Bhai, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear Lakshmi.
All right, great. Do you want to tell us about the event where you are currently and what it is that you are doing?
Yes, so we are Lakshmi at the mid-range, and today the Hindu community came together, and they mourning, you can say, and supporting all the people of India by standing with them, and then the memories by prayer, offer the prayer for the brave soldiers. I have Tushar Bhai here. Tushar Bhai.
Lakshmi, namaskar, and hello to everyone. We have gathered together, like this is a very symbolic, what you can say, a protest against that specific culture of sponsoring terrorism, killing innocent people day after day. month after month, year after year, across the country, and putting barriers that, okay, some people are fighting for religion, some people are fighting for different causes. But the problem is, this particular thing, any problem in the world can be resolved through negotiation, through talks and everything. There is no way, there is no reason that we can support this brutal act of terrorism, killing innocent people and giving them the name of different things called jihad, things of other things. It's not for religion, it's not for this thing, but today we have gathered that India, the way we are suffering this brutal act of terrorism from year after year, and some of the specific sponsors, some of the specific countries like Pakistan and all this, I would like to take a name, that they are sponsoring this thing against India from a long, long time. We really request entire world, entire governments of the world to stand together. Terrorism is not against one nation, not against by one religion or something. Terrorism is a disease. Let's fight together. Ma'am, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Tushar Bhai. We have Laksh Bhai here, Janna Ben. She also will say a few words, and then we have Janak Bhai from the Swaminarayan organization. She will say Janak Bhai also gonna say a few words.
Namaste, Laksh Bhai. Namaste.
Namaste.
Actually, 26/11, as it's written here, really a black day of the history. And we would like to call upon whole of the community of the world to come together and fight against this brutality. We have to fight. And we were talking a few minutes back, we were talking, one of our friends was talking, that yes, our dharma teach us that we should forgive. But in our God's hand, we have Murli, and in other hand, we have Chakra. So now it's time to take Chakra out. Jai Hind.
And thank you, Laksh Bhai. We also have Janak Bhai gonna say a few words from the Swaminarayan organization.
Go ahead, Janak Bhai.
Namaste.
Okay. Namaste.
I do remember this day. The day I was traveling from South Africa to the Mumbai, and I landed in the Bombay airport, and I see full security, and it takes us 4 hours to clear our luggage, and when we come out, then we came to know that, okay, today is the 26th November, and there is a terrorist attack in Bombay. And it was so traumatized, and so many people was like dying, too much of security, people are crying, and not only that, people are thinking that what exactly is going on. So I was the witness of this tragedy in Bombay, and I can say that this type of the terrorism attack, whether it is on a 26/11, whether it's a Twin Tower, whether it's a Akshardham, this is not acceptable. And if these things are going on, they are already in our neighbor countries now. We have to take the action, and people have to wake up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laksh Bhai. So this was the ground report from the Dharma Samvad team, and I have a handover to you back at the studio.
Thank you, Kirit Bhai. We will now go back to Professor Anand Singh. So, Professor, I have another question for you. Now, you've heard about Nariman House being restored. That's what Mark spoke about. You've heard from the ground about, the experience of people that were there. You've heard about, the mourning that is ongoing here in South Africa and also worldwide. Now, while we are all mourning tragedy, now it's understood that in Pakistan, those perpetrators, they are being hailed as jihadist heroes in Pakistan. Very much the same light as, Imran Khan has regarded, and he stated that, essentially Osama bin Laden is a martyr. Okay? So why is Pakistan not showing sincerity or real intent? Why is it not delivering justice, but allowing the leaders of these 10 perpetrators that came into India, those leaders are still in Pakistan. Why are they roaming freely and still protected by Pakistan alone? Professor?
Well, why are the terrorists in Pakistan still roaming the streets alone and receiving protection from the state? Is that your core question? Because you're breaking up.
Correct. I'll repeat the question. Yes. The question is, why is Pakistan not showing any sincerity or real intent in delivering justice and allowing the leaders, as we know, and you can see that, in the reports ongoing and so forth about the leaders of these organizations like LET and so forth, why are these leaders still roaming freely? Why are they still being protected by Pakistan?
Well, this is my personal assessment, and I'll give you my views on that. And that is because Pakistan needs the Pakistan military and ISI, as well as the civilian governments that are subdued by the military, need a cover for their unscrupulous actions in particularly India and against Afghanistan and other parts of the world. That is because many of them are actually practicing jihadists or militant Islamists who have a very distorted view of what Islam is all about. I do sincerely believe that most Muslims want to live in peace, want to collaborate with the neighboring countries in South Asia, want to be active members of the world economy, but they're not being given a chance because of the ways in which their country is continuously being hamstrung by the military and the secretive, or not necessarily secretive, but this organization called the ISI, or the Inter-Services Intelligence. They are responsible largely for this. But then, it's not just a simplistic act of explaining it in terms of what exists in Pakistan alone. A number of countries have been complicit with Pakistan. They've been supported for many years by the Americans. They've been supported for many years by the Indian National Congress in India. And there's an outlandish amount of proof for that. Very soon after the 26/11 attacks, Digvijay Singh, one of the leading, a very senior Congress member, had a book edited by himself with a whole range of articles introducing this concept of saffron terrorism against the BJP and the Modi government. Now, as an academic, I can tell you this much. To write an article worthy of national and international recognition, it does not take a month or two. It requires a lot of time, a lot of editing, inputs from people who would read and comment and review your article or the book, and you have to seminar on those thoughts and then put them together, which takes a lot of time. Digvijay Singh came out of the book barely a couple of weeks after this attack, blaming it all on the BJP and the RSS. So inside of India as well, there are a number of culprits who have aided and abetted the 26/11 attacks and who give legitimacy to those terrorists who roam about freely in Pakistan. So when they have so much support from the military, from the ISI, from India itself, from the United States, and now more recently, increasingly so, from China, it is important for us to understand and for the Indian government and all of the other forces in Europe to bring together forces that will neutralize these people who are continuously attacking people only because they belong to a different religion and another state. Sorry, you're on mute, I think. Laxbhai, you are on mute.
All right, let me try that again. I hope you can hear me now. Mark, I have a question for you. I want to ask you, can you perhaps share your personal feelings about this attack?
Well, on a personal level, I think the whole episode was very sad for me on a number of levels. Naturally, because people who I'd got to know personally and who really were only there to do good and to help anybody of any background had their lives taken away from them by the ideology that's been spoken about. And by people who seem to be rather misguided. But in addition to that, because of my particular affinity for India as well, I think there was a great sadness around that a country that's really been at the forefront in many ways of religious tolerance and a religion, the dominant religion in India is known for its tolerance. And despite that, it came under attack by an ideology that just doesn't seem to see the value in human life.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark. I want to ask another question now to Professor Anand Singh. Professor, can you hear me? I just want to ensure you can hear me. Yes?
Yes.
All right. Now, if we look recently in the press, there's been reports of beheadings in Mozambique. And there's also ongoing reports of extremist activities in Africa. And we know about Sudan, we hear about Somalia, Ethiopia, we hear about organizations such as Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, ISIS. Now, given that all of this is in Africa and Mozambique is around the corner from us and on our border, is there such a threat of terrorist attack present now in our local communities? Is terrorism now on our doorstep? Can you advise?
From my assessment, recently, just outside Durban, in Ottawa and Maryland, there have been attacks in mosques, particularly against different factions of the Muslim population. So yes, indeed, up to a point it has reached Durban, but the authorities are quick to bring it under control, at least for now. But in terms of what is going on in Mozambique, one can understand why they are engaged in this area that borders Tanzania. And that is because there are tremendous gas deposits on that border, and ISIS has entered the area because they need funding to actually continue with their activities. And if they get control over Cabo Delgado, they'll be able to get access to those gases and be able to do what they want to do with the money that they acquire from it. But I believe just by this weekend, the states that constitute Southern African Development Forum has got together and decided to actually act against these ISIS groupings that exist there. So if they don't act against it now, yes, indeed, South Africa is a very resource-rich country. It has a tremendous infrastructure. There's a lot of money that is being spent around here in this country, and it is very easy for them to start running amok in this part of the world as well. And unless the militaries of the Southern African Development Corporation do not get together and fight this menace, then South Africa is in danger of having more frequent attacks against it.
Okay. Professor, I would like to ask you a question, and this question came from the comments on Facebook. Why was the army delayed to arrive from Chandigarh during the attacks? Why was the Indian army not prepared enough for this kind of terrorist attack?
That's a very good question. And it's also a very disheartening one if you only know how how India was run under the Indian National Congress Party. Under the Gandhi family, India was being ruined and raped in every corner, especially with respect to its military strength. It was only in one part of the country that they had the specially trained force which could act upon this kind of incident. Now, the important thing for people to know is that they went head over heels to ensure that the Indian army was under-resourced and ill-equipped. It is extremely important for people now to understand and appreciate the Modi government and what it is doing to provision the Indian army with the kind of resources that they are now beginning to acquire. This is because Sonia Gandhi and her children and people like Digvijay Singh and other Congress leaders were making sure that the Indian army was a second-rated army because China has much bigger interest in that entire region. And it is important for people to understand the role that Modi is playing in transforming the Indian military, in bringing it back into the shape that it ought to be. So there was not enough transport, particularly at that time. There were deliberate delays, as many of the media accounts had actually stated, for this delay. And the result was that you are now beginning to see that the people are now exposing the role of the Gandhi family in misrepresenting Indian interests, with the result that nobody even wants, not only wants to not vote.
Unfortunately, seems like we have an audio issue. I'll just repeat what I've just said. I'd like to express my thanks to Mark. We seem to have lost Professor Anand. Seems to be some issue on the technology side, but nevertheless, as we are running short of time, I'd like to thank Mark for sharing with us the experience, the information about the family, for us to get some insight into the impact on the lives of people that were affected. And I certainly learned something about the Chabad organization as well. I wasn't aware of that at all. And I'd like to now hand over to Yashika Singh, who will now be taking over. Thank you, Mark. I certainly appreciate your time.
Dhanyavad, Meritos.
Dhanyavad, aapko bhi. Namaste. Thank you. Yashika ji, I'd like to add you on. Yashika ji, are you available?
Yes. Namaste, namaste, namaste. Thank you very much, Lakshmi. And to all the families of the victims that were killed during the Mumbai attacks, our pranam and salutations to you. We know that it is not an easy situation for you to live year after year when this type of commemoration happens. We also know that around the country, many people were acknowledging this type of terror. So from external terror to internal terror. Today, our next subject is dealing with the 16 days of activism in South Africa and globally. And it takes a look at gender-based violence in the world and the escalation of gender-based violence around the country. So I have with me in studio 3 very, very special ladies who will be sharing their expertise and skill in dealing with this matter. But just as a context, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence has come upon us once again. And every year around November, our government creates this opportunity for the world to be aware of the silent pandemic, as it is known by the United Nations. And this year, the theme is Orange the World. Why? Because women today around the world want answers, and they want answers now. There are 4 things that they are talking about: funding, responding, preventing, and collecting. And this entire color orange was actually inspired in India because of the nature of the color of sacrifice and the color of getting things done quickly. We know in the Hindu tradition, the symbol of Agni, the symbol of the Yajna, as well as the flag, brings together people. And it's also a symbol of the kinetic energy or the energy in action. This type of symbolism has traveled throughout the world, in France, in Italy, in America, etc., in order for this incidence of gender-based violence to be acknowledged and for answers to come from governments. As the world retreated inside homes due to the lockdown, measures introduced to curb the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, huge reports emerged on the alarming increase of the existing pandemic of violence against women. Accompanying the crisis has been a spike in domestic violence at exactly the same time that services, including the rule of law, health, and shelters, were being diverted to address the COVID-19 pandemic. But what really happened before the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, 243 million women and girls globally were abused by their intimate partners in the past year. Since the pandemic, with lockdown measures, countries around the world have seen this rise. And statistics have indicated that 1 in 3 women in the world will experience physical or sexual violence in her lifetime. This is disturbingly high. Research also shows that 50% of boys and 53% of girls aged 15 to 19 believe that wife beating is acceptable. One can just imagine how widespread this is in our homes, that children even find wife beating acceptable and even regular. So what can we do? This is the challenge I place to all my 3 guests in studio today who come from various fields and who will be sharing and raising awareness around these issues. And they themselves are committed to change. And before I go to my guests, the first one being Bina Chiba, who is a social worker, and she's also the director of the Gauteng Provincial Association for People with Disabilities. I also have in studio Jessica Radhika Gounden, who is an attorney at law, and we'll be examining a little bit about the legal framework in addressing issues on gender-based violence. And last but not least, we have Videshni Naidu Singh, who is going to join us a little later when she shares her humanitarian work in the country and her association with many organizations that are dealing with gender-based violence. But first up is a little video to share what is happening around the scourge of this pandemic.
My name is Rotimi Olawale. I am from Nigeria, and I'm the executive director of an organization called Youth Hub Africa. In 2012, I lived in Abuja, and one of the issues that young women face in Abuja is harassment from the government agencies. Any young women found outside after the hours of 10 p.m. and dressed in a certain way, they label them as prostitutes, and some of these women are arrested, physically beaten, or harassed. Youth of Africa was a small, growing organization at the time. It started with a virtual petition, and we got over 3,600 signatures. We got the attention of the National Human Rights Commission. We got media coverage on the issue, and we got a lot of people, even women who have been abused this way, who are willing to step forward and speak out because we started a virtual petition. By doing that singular action, we catalyzed other actions that we could not have predicted when we started to plan for that action. For me, these are the kinds of victories that we see in the work that we do on a daily basis. People making small changes in their daily lives, religious leaders making small changes in their approach and their response to issues of domestic violence during COVID and post-COVID allows more women to access justice, allows more women to get away from abuse and from violence in their homes. So I tell people to organize now, be determined, know what you want to do, bring your friends and family together, reach out to people on social media, and you'll be able to begin that building block of organizing in this generation.
Thank you so much. And from that little video, which is quite inspiring, it shows that even young people are becoming far more involved in addressing this issue, particularly in the African continent. So first up on the show is Bina Chiba, who is the Executive Director of the Gauteng Association for Persons with Disabilities, GPAPD. And as a director who itself was established under her wing in 2008, has grown tremendously since focusing and responding to the needs of persons with disabilities. Bina Ji is also married to an attorney, and both of them are very passionate about the empowerment of the Hindu community, Hindu women and children. And she sees her calling with disability as a key factor in raising awareness during this time of the 16 Days of Activism. Because we know in South Africa that this sector has perhaps been one of the most ignored sectors in the country. Bina Ji, namaste and welcome to the program. Bina Ji, you're muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
All right.
Tulsi Vivah greetings and namaste to everyone.
Namaste. Bina Ji, you're the Executive Director with the Gauteng Province of Provincial Association for Persons with Disabilities. Can you share with us a little bit about your role in the organization?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I come from a background of child welfare where I've served for many years. And in that field, I saw the neglect that this disability sector had undergone. And I thought it was my passion to try and improve the disability sector, the awareness around the disability sector, and the needs and talents of people with disabilities. I was appointed as the director in 2008, and our services at that time focused bringing the organizations that were already in existence, rendering services to people with disabilities under one umbrella body. So at that stage, we had just a few member organizations, 8 to be precise, and we brought them under our umbrella body of GPAPD, mentored them, supported them, and thereafter our member organizations grew to, at the moment, we have 25 member organizations affiliated to GPAPD and 13 developing members. And when I say member organizations, they are like branches, what you would term as branches. So they work independently, but they're affiliated to GPAPD, and we do mentor them, train them, assist them, and support them. The developing member organizations haven't reached the stage where they can be fully affiliated to GPAPD. We have certain criteria for membership, and they are then mentored and supported to come to that stage where they can affiliate to GPAPD. We also have social work services that we render throughout Gauteng and focus more on the areas that are underserviced and where there aren't no other services being rendered to people with disabilities. And we have 4 sub-offices throughout Gauteng. Some of our staff through COVID-19 is actually working from home at the moment, but we haven't suspended our services throughout the lockdown. We feel that it is essential for us to continue rendering services to the people with disabilities, especially during this period when there was a lot of anxiety, poverty, the families that couldn't really get out to protective workshops where they had a bit of a source of income, couldn't get out. And there were unique problems associated with people with disabilities. I think you will know that a lot of them are dependent on carers, and a lot of them could not even practice the protocols required in COVID-19. For example, washing of hands, they share toilets. So there were a lot of challenges that we experienced during that time. So our social work services are rendered towards that at the moment, but it also assists people who become disabled suddenly. I think all of us will know how traumatic being disabled can be. Having a child with a disability can be. The kind of burden, financial and otherwise, that people experience when they have a child with a disability, when they have a family member with a disability. And our social work services are geared towards helping families and individuals to cope with that situation.
That's absolutely amazing. And one of the reasons why I chose to actually start today's program around disability is that this sector has been so ignored in the country. And particularly now with the COVID-19 pandemic, the huge issue around the economy in our country has become a subject for the president and the rest of private businesses, etc., because many seem to be closing in and funding seems to be getting, lesser day by day. And I'm sure with organizations like yourself, funding becomes a critical area in order to deliver the service. So one of the things, if you got the PowerPoint, maybe you can put that out and when Bina is responding. One of the things, Bina, is that we are now in this space of the 16 Days of Activism period. And a lot of people are focusing on gender-based violence, particularly, with women at home and with children. And for us, which I've just mentioned earlier, women are saying enough is enough. And COVID-19 did not help the situation much because men couldn't work, their jobs had closed down, and they then, in turn, continued the abuse or the cycle of abuse in a family. How is it that your organization is able to assist in bringing awareness with the most vulnerable, and that is a child who is disabled or a woman that is disabled? How is it that you are able to make that impact?
So I think with disability, there are unique associated problems as well. For example, if you have a child that's disabled, there aren't enough facilities where we can actually accommodate children with disabilities. We talk about accessible accommodation, and I think we'd have to leave that for another day, in terms of time constraints. But I think where we need to have our environment a bit more user-friendly, not only for people with disabilities, but generally mom and prams. And one of the things that we do is that we serve within the Gauteng Premier's office, we have a universal design and access forum where we try and advise on changes that must be implemented to buildings. For example, our children cannot go to school because the schools are inaccessible. Women, like you mentioned, who are abused and who were abused, the numbers have increased during COVID-19. So those women were not even being able to be accommodated at facilities that cater for women with domestic violence or abuse because they were not accessible. So women had to remain in the environment that they were abused in, be reliant on the abuser. And our role is to actually try and sensitize the women, empower the women to try and see how she can get out of the situation. A lot of them are dependent on grants. So the financial implications are also a problem. But we also support those women and children who are experiencing financial problems. And I think we must be very grateful to organizations like yours like the World Hindu Organization and other Hindu organizations that did come to our assistance during COVID-19 and help some of our destitute families as well.
So I believe that awareness is critical and that not many people seem to respond to this in time. I mean, we've had situations where voluntary organizations around the country responded immediately to the hunger needs. And you had organizations like the Satya Sai organization, Hare Krishna, Swaminarayan, etc., that started the food campaigns. But I don't think everyone realizes that actually a person who is disabled isn't able to have access to go and bring the food, isn't able to have access to go and pick up the parcels, etc. And we found that a lot of the environment in which the disabled children and women are, that they have lacked that, and so they miss out even on the seva opportunities that presented itself. However, within the organization, you have very dedicated staff who actually become the support of at least 10 to 20 people in a particular area or branch, as you have alluded to earlier. Were they working full-time, Binaji, during the COVID-19 pandemic? And were they round the clock, or did you have to only have them work 3 days a week or 2 days a week? Maybe you can talk a little bit around that.
So I think we had to change the way we worked during COVID-19. And a lot of our staff then began working from home. But as you know, that we have a client base. So we've had clients on our database who were destitute clients, who were disabled. And you know, public transport is a big problem. It's not accessible, it's very expensive, and often our wheelchair users have to pay twice the price if they need to travel to collect the food parcels. So our staff worked throughout that period, sometimes more than they actually required to work, more than their 40 hours per week, because of the need that was established. We have on our client base those clients that have been destitute, and we had others that reached us through our Facebook page, through other social media where we knew that they needed assistance. But we also have a very strong network with other organizations, with other religious organizations, with the government departments, and we had a lot of referrals from those sources as well, where our staff was able to go out and assist these clients, not only with food parcels, but with counseling as well. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of them were very anxious, very depressed, very scared, very isolated. So our social workers were able to go out and assist in more than what they were actually prepared to. We did take COVID-19 precautions, and unfortunately, we didn't have much funding for PPEs. We didn't have much funding for food parcels, and that's where we had to reach out. And I must admit that a lot of the organizations did respond to our calls and did assist us, but the need is ongoing. And the problem is that a lot of our funding was reduced during COVID-19 and even currently, because the sources of our funding has dried up. A lot of our donors have now said that they cannot assist us any longer. A lot of them are now pumping money into the Solidarity Fund. And as a result, a lot of our NGOs had to actually close down. We were blessed to receive some funding that kept our doors open, but a lot of the funding dried out, resulting in some NGOs being essential services having to close down.
Okay, and here we see one of the big initiatives that your organization is taking in terms of fundraising, and that is Casual Day that will be happening next week on the 3rd of December. Yeah, can you share a little bit about why you chose this theme and how it will start enabling people to have more awareness?
So Casual Day is 23 years old, and it's a lifeline for many NGOs rendering services to people with disabilities. The funds that we get from Casual Day is generally used for things like assistive devices and to assist people with disabilities in training opportunities, learnerships, and that kind of thing. This year, due to COVID-19, we had to move our date to the 3rd of December. Normally, Casual Day is held the first Friday in September. And we thought it was appropriate to actually celebrate it on the 3rd of December. because December is the International Month for Persons with Disabilities. And then, of course, we collaborated it with the 16 Days of Activism, the campaign that we're running currently. So Casual Day is our major fundraiser at the moment. We depend on it extremely for our funding sources. And we would like to make an appeal to whoever's watching. If you could support us with Casual Day, we commemorate the event on the 3rd of December with a lot of events happening around the Gauteng area and I think countrywide as well. We have a huge event that's happening through the Premier's office at the Maslow Hotel in Sandton. We have our fundraising and sensitization awareness programs in Orange Farm, Lolly, and those areas to the south. And we also have linked up a partnership with the city of Joburg to do an awareness sensitization. We're using this opportunity. It's a fundraising opportunity, but we're also using it to sensitize the general community on positive reaction to people with disabilities and trying to prevent discrimination and the kind of stigma attached to people with disabilities, linking it to the prevention of violence and abuse to women with the disabilities and children as well. So we're looking at a culmination of a whole lot of events to look at these aspects in greater detail.
That's absolutely marvelous. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Tech. That's fine. One more question before I go to the next speaker, and I think we can speak a lot about the issue around violence against children and people and women with disability, is that in this space we're in, are you getting government support effectively? And I know you're substituting a lot with community organizations, etc. And I think it's very important for service-driven organizations to acknowledge you. But from the government itself, what has been the gaps?
So the funding gap remains our first priority. And at the moment, although we subsidized by the Department of Social Development, it's a partial subsidy that we only get for our social work posts. Now, to run the organization, you cannot just run it with social work staff. There are operational costs. We have our admin staff. We need to, and most of our staff actually work part-time because we cannot afford full-time staff. So the government funding is restricted to just social work posts, which is only 75% of the subsidy. And we must admit, our social work salaries are pathetic. Our working conditions are pathetic. Very often our staff do home visits using public transport because we do not have accessible vehicles. We do not have enough vehicles for our staff to share and do home visits. And, this became a bit of a nightmare during COVID because there wasn't enough public transport. So the government support is very limited. We have been lobbying and advocating for an increase in social work salaries, in subsidies to non-social work and other professional posts. But it has been very difficult. It is an ongoing struggle for a long time.
Sharing, and I'm sure our listeners out there have listened to you very carefully, and the website details will also be available on the Facebook pages that we will bring up a little later. Thank you, Benaji. Up next is attorney and lawyer Radhika Jessica Gounden, who hails from the Chatsworth area in KwaZulu-Natal. And she's a proactive lady spiritually. She's also been involved with women and child abuse cases for a very long time. And she's also been involved in looking at some of the policy issues around gender-based violence in the country. One of the things that I suppose the government of the day had recognized after a period of over 24 years in terms of our democracy, that there was a real need to address the issue of gender-based violence, and particularly child-based households where violence occurs. Last year, the government created an emergency response action plan on gender-based violence and femicide, which was announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa in September last year. So Radhika ji, welcome to the show. And I want to ask you whether that particular plan has had any impact and what type of impact it has had so far. Are you muted?
Yes, I am. Namaste, Haribo,
Namaste.
Sairam, everybody. Vanakkam. Thank you for having me. Regrettably, it is such a sad time when we have to dedicate 16 days to highlight the scourge of domestic violence in our community. That's very sad. It's a situation that should not be the case. And yes, government is trying to do as much as they can in terms of having this policy and having the national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide. But is it helpful at grassroots level? And that, I think, is still too early to say whether or not there's been some impact. You must know the rollout was last year in 2019, I think September. And then, we had a few months going, and I think it was just being rolled out at the time. And then we had the lockdown. Now, the sad part is the lockdown has certainly aggravated tensions in these domestic relations. So whether or not we have seen the full benefit of this strategic plan is yet to be, determined. Every bit of exposure about the scourge that we're facing in South Africa relating to domestic violence is always a welcome thing. We need to shine the spotlight on it. We need to be proactive about showing the community, listen, this is the high levels. Regrettably, South Africa really has one of the highest levels of domestic violence in the world, and it's one of the most unsafe places for women. And it's a very, very sad state of affairs. And I think, what the rollout was, the strategic plan was that, yes, they did allocate a budget, which always is a bit worrying, does that budget really go to the place that it needs to go? Are victims of domestic violence have access to that budget? Are they giving bridging finance to find their own way when they have to say goodbye to an abusive partner? If they have no source of income and they cannot stay in an abusive marriage, is there any shelter that will provide for them financially while they transition to earn their own income? I mean, these are all questions still to be raised. I know that there is a budget allocated for the National Strategic Plan, but is it going to help the women, the victims of abuse, the women wanting to get away from abusive relationships, women with, little children that can't fend for themselves out without the support, financial support of their abusive partners? So yes, there is something in place, but we have yet to see the benefits of it at a grassroots level. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. And you work between community and the law. And I'm sure you've had cases that were reported and many cases that have not been reported. How do you feel when you engage with the local communities, and are there opportunities for women in the local communities to actually seek recourse?
We all know, and we can talk till we're blue in the face, like you can do, to an abused victim. You can do this. Why don't you do this? There's options available. There's advice desk for abused women. There's pro bono. There's legal aid. But you know what? A lot of it, letting go of an abusive partner becomes such a psychological thing. It's not easy as you and I might think. And yes, it's quite apparent that they're living with absolute beasts who are so abusive. It's beyond shocking. But women choose to stay. There's a lot, from my observation, of course, I'm speaking, a lot of them know that their partners are abusive, that they cannot continue with the current situation, but they have no other options. Some people, their families don't render support or assist. In fact, that is one of the factors that lead to women getting so abused, because they have no support in terms of emotional support, financial support from family members, from the community, any other loved ones, and they what we call a stick and stay mentality. They stick it out, and because what other option do I have? So yes, as a lawyer of 20 years, I've seen a lot of women be in abusive situations and yet are powerless to do anything, mentally and physically. Mentally, in the sense that, no, I'm going to be with this man till I die, and I'm just going to tolerate. They've been so conditioned in their abuse. That means that, they watch their father abuse their mother. For them, this becomes a sense of normalcy. And they grow up thinking this is acceptable. So when their husband does that, it's like, yes, every woman goes through this. But to the outside observer, this is obviously so unacceptable. So we see it clearly, but unfortunately victims, people in the situation, people who've come out of that, and there's been many instances where we went to court, got interdicts against abusive partners, and within 2 weeks they were back with that abusive partner. They'd abandon that application and they'll go back because this cycle of abuse is all that they've known. So that's the challenge. So we can talk till we blue in the face. Victims, empowering victim is not as easy as pointing them to, an advice desk or pointing them to the court. There's so much more psychological help that's needed by them.
Absolutely. And I think critically that there are far more greater challenges facing women today with regard to violence and abuse in their homes and also outside with the extended family situation. Hindus come from that background, but not many Hindu women have the support of their priests or their extended families, and they seem to be even more vulnerable. Outside of the space of our community, in marginalized communities, as we've just heard, they're fighting poverty, they're fighting crime. How do such women gain access? And what are some of the things that we can share with such women?
When you say get access in terms of legal options?
Both legal as well as help, yes.
Well, we can talk about spiritual help and then legal help and, emotional help. As Hindus, we all have some duties that, if we see some suffering, we are duty bound to render some assistance. So even if we are physically unable to give the support ourselves, we can point them in the right direction. There is free legal advice. Like I'm somebody that, we've taken on matters for legal assistance when, interdicts are needed, that sort of thing. The other option that very few people, in terms of our Domestic Violence Act, is that a victim of abuse need not run to the courts for assistance. It can be anybody. It can be a social worker, a parent, a sister, a member of the community. If they know that there's a victim of abuse there that's too afraid to venture out and secure this interdict, anyone can be empowered, run to court and say, we have reason to believe that this person is, like a prisoner in her own home. She's not allowed to go to court to get the interdict. And we believe that she's, enduring high levels of abuse or any level of abuse. And the courts are obliged to listen to that applicant and say, yes, although you are not the direct victim, but yes, you are in a position of support to render to this victim. So yes, there are options available. The thing is, we can say reach out, but like I said, even if you can't leave the house, a third person, a neighbor, if you can drop a note outside to somebody, please, I need, assistance. You can get the police called out, and which brings me to another thing about victims of domestic abuse, is that sometimes when they do reach out, they don't get the support that they ought to be getting. We have not got to that victim-centered attitude as yet. I know of instances where clients really suffered, abuse. They went to the police station and they were turned away, and they said, no, it's domestic abuse, and don't worry, your husband will, sort himself out. Let him get sober. They sort of didn't give them that importance to say, yes, your concerns are valid. Your concerns about your safety are genuine, and yes, we're going to listen to you, and yes, we're going to help you. It's brushed off. They attribute, this is just a domestic spat, and that turning an eye to that led to far more serious abuse, and women are being maimed, murdered, abused. It is just unacceptable. And the sad part, as Hindus, we are taught to respect women in our lives. And, if you're really following Hindu Dharma, you will know that if you are dealing with a very younger woman, you take them, a young child, a girl child, you have to accept them and see them as your daughter. And if it's somebody almost equal to you in age, you have to see them as your sister. And if it's somebody older than you, you have to see them as your mother. So if we really are following Hindu Dharma as well, there won't be a question of I'm creating violence against another human being. So it's a lot of the times where people stray away from what is Hindu Dharma. That is my observation. Well, obviously I'm a Hindu lawyer, so I can attribute it to that level. But a lot of people are sitting in sad situations, and a lot of time their family members are completely unaware that that particular family member is facing those levels of abuse, because a lot of people, especially in marriages, they carry on this facade that all is well. And let me tell you about some women who just think, no, but this is not abuse that people talk about. This is just a slap. This is just, something minor. It doesn't constitute as abuse. My husband is not an abusive person. But when the Domestic Violence Act, you can stop me if I'm rambling on, but the Domestic Violence Act describes abuse.
I do need to move on because we have another
Okay.
wonderful speaker as well. As articulate as you are in the studio, but I think the one point that I need to ask you is the raising of the boy child, and I'm going to pose the question as well to Videshni just now. You've got two sons. You've come through a very difficult divorce yourself, and you've seen other victims with children. How do we change the narrative to raise the boy child?
Well, I've got 3 boys, and I have to tell you, empowering the community starts with how you raise your children. And it extends to, especially if you're raising male child, because you have to teach them that at some point they will be under, they'll be in a very, like a subordinate position to a woman of influence. That means they might have a female boss, that their spouse might earn a lot more than they do, and their sister will achieve far greater heights, academically and work-wise than they would. We start to teach them about respect for women and how not to say demeaning things. These common things that men associate with all these wife memes and girlfriend memes, and all of this should stop. We do not laugh at anything that makes fun of anybody, whether it's women or men or animals. These things we frown upon. So teaching starts from a very young age. Schools should be a little bit more proactive to say, you know what, we treat everybody with love and respect, and not to say that I am better than this person because I'm stronger. I can intimidate my very, very fragile wife or partner. So it starts at but respect for women is something every parent should be inculcating in males, because it starts, once it becomes a conditioning, it becomes a way of life. So that respect for how they treat others become the norm,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Radhika ji. I'll come back to you in a little while. I want to go to Videshni Naidu Singh, who is regarded as a humanitarian worker. She's also an attorney, and she's working with an organization called JAM. I think it's Joint Action Management, since May this year. Prior to that, she's worked for 7 years on the ground in the Lenasia area, seeking solutions for the empowerment of women and children in the community, and particularly around issues of addiction. And, as she's also created an NPO called Light Workers Women's Organization, and the Social Services Institution that often partners with them. Namaste, Videshni ji, and welcome to the program.
Namaste, Yashika. Thank you so much for having me. It is indeed a pleasure to be part of such honorable women guests.
Thank you very much. Videshni ji, you've been part of many work programs in the community. You've also been involved with women's empowerment initiatives. Can you share a little bit about some of your experiences on the ground, noting the fact that it is the 16-day of activism period, and noting the fact that it seems to be everyone's concerned around November and we must do something because we've got to tick boxes. I work in a corporate environment, and we have to look at a calendar. Did you do a program on 16 days? Did we do Heritage Day? And it shouldn't just be at this period of time. But what has been your experience on the ground?
Okay, so my experience on the ground has been the fact that, when we talk about marginalized communities, the reality is everything that we talk about is experienced to the nth level in these communities. So whether we're talking about human trafficking, gender-based violence, we're talking about toxic masculinity issues, we're talking about, the domestic violence, as I mentioned, everything happens across all different communities. But the reality is the most marginalized communities are indeed the most affected ones. My experience on the ground has largely been around creating programs for boy children. Last year, 2 years back, when I joined a social services institution, I actually went to the social services institution from training a bit at the magistrate's court, and I saw so much the gap between the social workers having to present and, provide proof for their cases, and how vulnerable children were actually sent back to abusive homes purely because, the social workers might not have had the support and professional support in order to deal with these cases. And being the personality that I am and driven from working on the ground, I entered social services institution, purely because I wanted to market the institution. But what I met there was the severe gaps that we found in terms of how inundated and over inundated social workers are dealing their normal caseload, that when it comes to providing solutions in terms of creating programs for children in schools and the like, they rely largely on support of others to do so. So when it came to especially gender-based violence, my passions were around the fact that we found in all of the schools surrounding the institution at where I worked at, there was, boy children as young as 11 years old that were raping each other in the bathrooms. And this is purely because they've had this done to them. For me, the future was set and clear that those that experience the abuse, you have to understand how much more abusive they might become. And I was so passionate about creating a program, and I led it. It was called Stop It at the Start, purely to deal with male toxicity issues that we found were prevalent in the communities. Because if you sat with the boy children, all of them had a resounding yes when it came to, is it okay for a man to hit a woman? And they answered yes, because when we asked why, they said it was purely because a man can hit a woman if she is cheating on him. That is what we were told. And we were told, is it ever okay for a woman to hit a man? And there was just spontaneous laughter at that. And the result is that, if we do not jump in to tackle these issues at that level, if we do not dedicate ourselves, and the sad thing is, I went from the courts into social services, and I started seeing, and I'm very real about experiencing breakdowns in the system everywhere. Right down to when we work with women at the moment, I often find that when women are seeking shelters, there's hardly a place that you could send them to. When women are seeking domestic violence orders and protection orders, they are often faced with files going missing or treated terribly at police stations. And when I talk to you about breakdown, I am telling you that I've experienced breakdown from the court experience. I've experienced breakdown from social service institutions, where we just continue to marginalize the people that are most vulnerable. And for me, I think it became so much a part of the seva, this heavy duty that I feel upon each of us that are professional to step in and make a difference. That yes, some years ago, 7 years ago, I created an organization around active women who felt as strong as I did about entering the arena. We did some marvelous community work in terms of refurbishment of creches, giving support to all the creche owners, empowering them in their work. We did court packs for rape victims, and sadly so, we had to do hot packs for children that were also, abuse victims in court. We did programs empowering women that had lived the lives of prostitutes and were in rehabilitation. And, while we serviced all of these nice needs, I think the true empowerment work of our organization began when we actually dedicated full time our service to Lenasia. And we got involved in some serious programs around personal and self-transformation workshops, where we decided that we had to become the solution also in changing and transforming people's mindsets, allowing them to dictate that abuse was intolerable. But in order to do that, you had to work with them almost on a spiritual level, help them understand,
So
Sorry, Yashika?
that's beautiful. And no, that's absolutely beautiful in terms of where you have come. You have seen from the level of the mud where you can't get any responses from the judges, from the courts, from the police. We've just heard Jessica speak about the blasé attitude of this toxic masculinity approach, as well as this patriarchal system that we went through. And I think even more than patriarchy has been this paternalistic attitude that we've had to deal with over a series of time. And even the short space of our democracy can't change that generational attitude that men had on women for all that time. But yet again, we come from a culture and a tradition that exemplified the goddess. The Devi Sukta of the Rig Veda speaks so highly and eloquently of the feminine divine principle and that energy. How have you found, firstly, this contradiction of the male patriarchy within our community and even in the Hindu community, and then finding some reservoirs of energy going back to the Vedas and going back to our scriptures to empower you to take the next step forward? So the dual question: one, how did you deal with this contradiction? And two, what was it in our scriptures that enabled you to actually go forward?
Okay, so for those that know me quite well, I've always been a Devi worshipper. So for me, and when I started doing a whole lot of spiritual reading and outside of our scriptures as well, the one thing that was resounding for me was the ability of women to heal. You see that in a mother's role. You see that in society at large. I look at with great respect at female leaders and what they bring to the party, and more often than not, it is a sense of cooperation over competition. It's a sense of bringing healing. It is a sense of bringing love and compassion. And for all those reasons, I actually believe that women are best placed in leadership today. Women should actually be at the forefront of all the solutions that we are trying to find in society, purely because women have the inherent ability to heal. And when we look at, I don't even want to go through the kind of things that I had seen firsthand on the ground, purely because it shook my world. When and I want to relate it to on this forum. I looked at a social worker one day in a drug anti-drug conference, and she stood in front of the audience and she spoke about receiving a child outside social services, the district, the department, and she spoke about the fact that this child was drenched in a substance from head to toe, and the child was handed over her to a man who said that he bought her for 30 rand on the street. And when they tested the substance, they found that it was different samples of semen on the child. And the social worker spoke about the fact that how is it as a social worker, she could go home to lie next to her husband that night. You know, when we realize, and from my court experience too, when we realize the levels to which society has broken down, we realize fully that if we do not act to empower women, to instill leadership in them, to respect them, to give them these roles where, you know, they could actually start from a position of healing society, even through their professionalism. You know, I've some years I battled so much with studying law, because I felt that, you know, for all intents and purposes, what should be my greatest success, I was being pulled into corporate roles, and for a humanitarian heart that I had, there was always this grating at me that, you know, I could use my professional qualifications to achieve so much more. And I call on every other woman in our organization as well. You know, we have beautiful, wonderful souls leading light workers too, and we constantly call on them to use their professionalism even on the ground. And that is how we are creating solutions. We've created, you know, sewing programs for women, giving them a sense of purpose. You know, I used to drive a car from Lenasia into town every day because we had someone tutor the women on sewing skills. And a simple thing like seeing poverty-stricken women wash their faces, dress up and sit in my car, you know, just to say, Videshni, we feel like we're working now, we're working towards something. And I realized it had to begin with a shift in their spiritual mindset, within their emotional mindset. And when we bring it back to our scripture, you know, there is one very important, and I keep looking for it. It is about the fact that even India will become the great nation again when we resurrect women as mother. And I'm sorry, you know, sometimes I believe that Bollywood too has contributed to objectifying women. And I believe even in our own country, you know, we should start reporting all of our, you know, comedians that make fun of women, you know, purely because it is those things at that level that actually allow the abuse to creep in, because you are belittling, you are denigrating, and you are enforcing a thought process where you're treating women like nothing, you know. Sorry, I get emotional about these issues, but yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think I hear your passion because it comes from the heart space. And I think this is what our country needs to learn, and the global community. And I'm so happy that you made the reference to India rising again, because Shakti can only rise if the balance of the male and female energy is in place, and that the nature of taking women, the Matru Shakti, back in our power is critical, and that has not been happening. And I think slowly there seems to be a tide turning, but it's going to take a longer time. And even in the great Mother Africa herself, who needs to take ownership of her heritage and ownership of her way of life. Videshni ji, what is your message to the youth of South Africa today?
So, you know, I speak from the viewpoint of being a mother, and I speak from the viewpoint of mentoring young girls. And if there is anything that I want to start off with, is that, and it's something that my husband says that always rings very clear, very true in my ears. You know, he raises our children to say that the world isn't fair, that everybody is not going to be treating you with fairness. So too, women must understand that we are being raised from an unfair perspective. I look at my daughter, and, you know, she's a beautiful soul, you know, involved in humanitarian work herself. But I realize that I have to also practice parenting differently to my boys versus my girl, because there too, we have to tell them that no equality exists as long as your life is in danger. Something else that I want to share with women and young girls and youth is that, especially in Indian communities, we become so fixated and we ask children, what is it that you want to be? And more often than not, we are delighted when we hear that they're growing up to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer.
Absolutely.
And we believe, okay, I've raised my child right, we forget to teach them that somewhere along the path, with whatever profession you choose, and even if you are someone following your passion, you have to grow up with the social conscience. And in our household, we instill that. If we are raging riot against and protesting against corruption, my children will be on the streets with me. I believe, unfortunately, we've kept our children behind these high walls and actually created an entitled existence. And therefore, you actually see breakdown so clearly in children when they're forced into the reality of the world. And my advice will be, we have Seva as part of our religion. Involve your children all the time. Sometimes I suffer with the guilt because I have my youngest son, who, again, wonderful soul, like my older son, very compassionate, who says, Mom, will you please stop telling us these stories? And the reality is that I can't do it because I want them to grow up to know that we do not exist alone in this world. Everything is not due to us in this world. We are born and we take human birth because we have to learn our duty and our connectedness to each other. And if we do not get that right, then we will die having wasted this human birth. So to every youth out there, embrace all opportunities. Whatever might be your passion, go after it. I went everywhere my passion took me. Today, I'm a professional humanitarian and I stand, in international rooms and I talk about international standards of human rights. And I speak from the heart because my journey has been that we are constantly transforming. So why should you decide that being a lawyer is going to be the rest of your life? Embrace
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Videshni ji. Thank you for your passion and your love and your care and your concern for humanity at large and for all that you do. We could go on talking a lot tonight, and we're really coming towards the end of the program. So one last word from Jessica and Bina in 30 seconds. What is your message to the girl child? 30 seconds. Radhika ji. Your mic.
It's imperative that we all here in South Africa and generally in the world become active instruments of change in our homes and our communities to change, put a stop to the scourge that is gender-based violence. That's religious organization, faith-based groups, the public, the media, traditional organizations, businesses, and labor must come to the party, and all, because everything, like Videshni said, we are all interconnected. If we ignore this here, it's going to come back in a bigger way down the line. So the sooner we nip it in the bud, the better.
Thank you so much, Radhika ji. Thank you for your love and your care as well. May our women be strong. Bina ji, 30 seconds. Unmute your mic.
Okay, just as a last word to our families out there, accept that each one of us are different. Our children are different with different talents, different skills. So if your child is disabled or if a family member is disabled, please do not feel ashamed. Please accept the child and the person for who they are, their skills, their abilities, and we are there to support any family that needs our assistance.
Brilliant. To all religious organizations out there, to Seva organizations, you have your hands full. And today we want to see cohesive responsibility, everyone working together in partnerships. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this wonderful dynamic program. And we hope to have more in the next few weeks. And I'd like to leave you now with a prayer technical. It will be the last few words, which is the mantra of the Gayatri, the divine bliss of love and learning. Om Shanti. Thank you, everyone. Namaste.